Apple has asked a federal judge to vacate an order forcing the company to unlock a phone belonging to one of the San Bernardino terrorists.
In a court filing just released, Apple says what the FBI wants is unconstitutional. Paula Reid is in Washington right now. Paula, what do we know?
This was just filed in federal court. This is Apple's response to the government in one of the biggest cases in a generation. Now, Apple is demanding that the court reject what they describe as a dangerous power. They say that no court has ever asked the government to be able to get this kind of power, never forced a company to unwrite its own software, undermine its own security protections. They say that this is ultimately something that should be left up to Congress, and then the court should reject this request.
Paula, as we go through, and I know you're going through it as well, the language in here is very, very strong. At one point in the brief, it says Apple believes this is too dangerous to build, in reference to the backdoor that the government is asking Apple to provide. How far could this go?
In terms of the back door?
No, in terms of this case. I mean, we're talking Congress to decide, but ultimately, could it be even the Supreme Court?
Oh, no doubt. Vlad, both sides have said that they're willing to fight this all the way to the Supreme Court. It is not an overstatement to say that this is one of the biggest cases in a generation. I mean, this pits privacy against security, business against government. Both sides have heavily entrenched interests. Apple's whole brand is security. And the FBI Director Comey, the Attorney General, they have both said that they cannot continue to do their jobs working up against this encryption technology, especially as it trickles down to so many other devices. So, Vlad, both sides are absolutely willing to take this all the way to the Supreme Court.
So what happens next, Paula? Where do we go?
The next thing that'll happen is over the next week, any entity that wants to support Apple or support the FBI will have the opportunity to file a brief on their behalf. Then about a week after that, there'll be a hearing on this case, and this magistrate judge will ultimately decide for one side or the other. Whatever they decide, it'll ultimately be appealed to the next level, the trial court level. Inevitably, whoever loses there will appeal to the appeals court, and this will likely be offered up to the Supreme Court for them to potentially decide. So it's a long legal road. But again, what's at stake here in this case cannot be understated. Encryption is very important to consumers here in the U.S. and abroad. If encryption is undermined, it is possible that Apple's business model could be heavily hurt. So this is an incredibly important case.
Paula, and again, going through this, in it says, the government says just this once, just this phone, but the government knows those statements are not true. Indeed, the government has filed multiple other applications for similar orders. If this order is permitted to stand, it will only be a matter of days before some prosecutor in some other important case, before some other judge seeks a similar order using this case as a precedent. Director Comey sort of alluded to that himself today.
That's exactly right, Vlad. Earlier today on the Hill, FBI Director Comey said this is a unique situation. It's very unusual to have this specific phone with this specific kind of operating software. It's a one-time thing. That's just not true. No matter what this judge, no matter how narrowly a judge decides, if they decide for the FBI and other law enforcement entities at the state and local level, they're going to try to use that case to do the same thing again and again and again. This is all about precedent. There's no law currently on the books that speaks specifically to this. So whatever happens in the court, that becomes the law of the land. So any argument that this is just a one-time thing, that's a disingenuous, and legally, it's just not right.
You know, this has been argued and debated on a public platform so far, Paula. But I'm just curious. I know that these papers were just released. Was there anything that stood out to you from your perspective that has not been discussed publicly?
This is a lot of what we expected, because Apple has been very public that they intended to argue this on First Amendment ground. I think it's very interesting, this idea of writing code as a First Amendment right. Not surprisingly, that's a very unsettled area of the law at this point. Another reason that this might make it all the way to the high court, because it's not clear whether or not when you force a company to write code, whether or not that is actually protected speech and whether you can actually force a company. So I think the whole idea of First Amendment and code writing, it's very interesting. It's very novel. It's something you've never really seen before in a legal case. But ultimately, Apple has been very public about how they intended to fight the government in this case.
Paula Reid for us in Washington and breaking it down. Paula, thank you so much.